We're going to take a quick aside on a topic that isn't covered in the AP Computer Science A exam, but it's something that I feel like is worth knowing just because it might come up along the way and you might see it, even though you might not necessarily use it a lot. So the motivation for this is that we were just talking about previously how I can kind of daisy chain if and else statements together to make some decisions in my program. And so if I have 5 or 6 different potential options to choose from, I can just if else all 5 or 6 of those together and just make a decision from there. So I'm going to contrive an example here. It's going to be some advice for a student who is or for their GPA, I guess. So here's what's going to look like. I'm going to take input from the user. And this is, like I said, a contrived example where their GPA is either going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. So what I'm going to do is make a new scanner. I'll call it input equals and new, and then scanner, and then system.in. While I'm at it, I of course shouldn't forget that I need to import my scanner class to be used from java.util scanner. Perfect. All right. So I'm going to take user or input from the user here, where I'm asking what's your GPA. So system.out.print print line. What is your GPA? And like I said, contrived example here because I'm only gonna take an integer value. So I'll go ahead and use my scanner then to grab that next value that's given in by the user. So this will just be, let's see, so I need an integer. This will be my GPA equals, and then I'm gonna use my input dot next int is what I'm gonna be grabbing. So I now have my integer value for GPA here. And so let's say I want to give a suggestion for what they should be doing differently or staying or keeping the same depending on what their GPA is. So like I would have a case for if their GPA was 0 or if their GPA was 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. And so I could have 5 to get 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4 if else statements kind of all linked together. But I'm going to show you a different way of doing the same thing, and the way that thing is called is it's called a switch. So what a switch does is, like an if statement, it takes in this value that's kind of testing against. So in this case, it's a GPA. And so what's going to do with this is that it's going to choose what are called cases inside my switch, of which it will select one of them to I guess activate or go through, which you'll see here in a second. So what these cases look like is this as case, and then the value of the case that I want to be talking about. So in this case, I'm talking about integer values. So the first one would be case 0, which would be if someone gave me or told me that my GPA was a value of 0. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just knock out all my cases here. They could also input a GPA of 1, or a GPA of 2, or a GPA of 3, or a GPA of 4. All right. So these are my 5 cases here, and so I want to be able to do something after each of these. So similar to how my if statements will always execute kind of the next line it goes within them, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to give it some type of value after case 0 if they input the value of 0. So if they input the value of 0 as their GPA, my question would be, of course, is something wrong? So, having a GPA of 0 is not a normal thing. So I'm going to ask this person, do you how about have you taken a class yet? That's going to be my response if they tell me that their GPA is 0. That seems like it makes sense. If they input a GPA of 1, I'm going to tell them that, seeking help is strongly advised. Good. Okay. Perfect. Seeking help is strongly advised. That's going to be my suggestion for someone who has a GPA of 1 and then a GPA of 2. Let's say system.out.println. You're doing okay, but maybe try to study a little bit more. Would be my suggestion for someone with a GPA of 2, and then my GPA of 3. GPA, I mean, B average, you're doing okay. System.out.println. How about this? Println. Doing great. Just try a little bit harder. Wonderful. So that's my suggestion if they have a GPA of 3. And then my last situation is a GPA of 4. I'm going to tell them outstanding, comma, maybe try to get outside a little bit more, period. Okay, that's my advice. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens, see if it works the way that it would make sense for it to work. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. Whoop, here it is. So this is going to be, I call this what? Fun with switches. Fun with switches.java. And I will run this fun with switches. Perfect. What is your GPA? I have a GPA of, let's go with 2. Enter. Okay, that might not have been what we were expecting here. I got 3 different responses. Maybe try to study a little bit more. Doing great, just try a little bit harder, and maybe try to get outside a little bit more. Okay, so what I got was actually all 3 of these responses. So I would make the argument that the switch doesn't work in the way that I think is necessarily obvious to us, but we can change it so that it does. So how this actually works is my switch takes an input, some value, GPA in this case, and then it looks at each of my cases, and it'll ask, all right, does this satisfy case 0? And the answer is no. So it'll skip case 0. And then look at case 1. Does it satisfy case 1? No, it does not. So it'll skip down to case 2. Does it satisfy case 2? Yes, it does. And so whenever I satisfy my first case, what will happen is then it'll execute all of the lines of code after it inside the switch. So I can stop it from doing that if I wanted to. The way that I stop this is by using the break keyword. The break keyword, what it does is tells the program that if you get to break, you should exit out of whatever the segment of code that I'm in this case, this switch. We can see this later if when we do while loops or do for loops or whatever type of loops we want, or if we're looking at functions, we can break out of that segment of code that we're in. And so what this will do is if I add break after each of these cases, and I run this again, then what I will get is what probably makes the most intuitive sense, which is that I will only satisfy one of these cases at a time. So if I try this again, switches, what's my GPA? 2, maybe try to study a little bit more. Perfect. So the question you might be asking yourself is, number 1, why are switches set up that way? And number 2, how is this any better than just using chained if-else statements together? And my answer to you would be that, well, actually, this lack of using a break and executing multiple things at the same time might actually be a benefit. So, for example, what if I instead, so if you have a GPA of 0, not only do I want to say, have you taken a class yet, but also suggest that seeking help is strongly advised. What will happen here is if I type in case 0, so if I get my GPA 0, I will execute both of these lines, And so then maybe I also want to, if I enter in case 2, maybe try to study a little bit more, and also doing great, just try a little bit harder, then this would actually, I could execute both of these if I type in a 2 as opposed to a 3. And so, the logic here is that I could potentially do multiple things at the same time depending on what exactly I'm looking for. So if I try this, I didn't save. If I try this, and now I have, okay, so compile again and run. My GPA is 2. Well, it'll give me both of those versus if I just have a GPA of 3, it'll just give me the 1 output. So another example of when this might be useful that I can kind of make up here on the spot is that, like I said, these don't have to be numbers. What if instead I was asking, what is the letter grade that you got in a class? And so they can input a character then that I could take and compare like so. And so I could have case A, and then I could also have lowercase a. Oh, wrong quotes. Lowercase a. And so if I wanted to have the same output for both them putting in uppercase A and lowercase a, well, I could get rid of that statement, and both of these cases would end up going to this one statement here, which is kind of nice. Okay. Let me go back to my example though. Let's go back to, actually, can I just, how about this? Boop, 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 boop. Perfect. What if there's one additional thing that I forgot to mention, so I should have added in earlier. I have another situation where, what if they put in a number that isn't 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4? I can catch that as well. And the way that I catch that is I give one more case, which is called my default case, which will catch everything out. So like if I do print line, this is not a valid GPA, period. That's not what I wanted. I want this. Perfect. This will now catch any other values I input. So for example, if I say my GPA is 21, it will tell me that's not a valid GPA. So the default case catches everything else. So, like I said, switches are not something that are actually in the Computer Science A curriculum, but it's worth knowing because if you're around enough and you see enough Java programs, you'll see switches come up maybe every once in a while. And so it's just worth being able to at least read them, even though you may not use them on a regular basis. So that's switches. They're kind of a replacement or an alternative option to using chain together ifs and elses, but it's something worth knowing so that we can kind of expand our knowledge and be able to read other people's code if we need to.